I keep on saying this to you guys. I am not worried in the slightest about Reform UK because there is no reason, no evidence from what I can see that there should be this amount of sheer panic you see some other channels give Reform UK. And if they want to do that, fine. You be you. But I will tell you this now. Last week, there were nine by-elections. Reform UK won none of them. But Reform UK is so popular. They're so ahead in the polls. Oh my. They're so popular. Why are they not winning by-elections? In the lead up to the last general election, we were constantly watching the Lib Dems win these absolutely amazing by-election wins. We were also seeing Labour do the same as well, which was predicting what was going to happen at that upcoming general election. And if you really want to have a look at, Reform UK's current council seats, the vast majority of them, they have not won in a general election. They have won them because they have been defections. So people have defected to Reform UK. The vast majority of them have been through defections. They've ran for another party and then defected to Reform UK. And I've said before, those people should run again under the Reform colours. See how, are they really that confident they can actually win on that? And bear in mind, I think about 40 odd percent, I think it might be, can't remember, trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head, are from the Conservatives. So, as I keep on saying to you guys, I'm not worried because the evidence is not there that Reform UK are going to sweep the next general election. And judging by how this last weekend has gone, with the spat now becoming an open civil war between Lowe and Farage, if he cannot keep 5 MPs, well, 4 MPs, because, there's him, but if he cannot keep that smaller party under control, what hope does he have for a larger party? And bear in mind, we have seen numerous examples that, shall we say, Reform's vetting procedure wasn't exactly as rigorous as they had claimed. So, as always, before we do go getting into this, and the open spat between, Lowe and Farage has gone on this weekend, because it's been funny to watch them just tear into each other. There has been, of course, what's been going on behind the scenes, and that's what we're going to have a look at today, because Charles Dilnot, the current editor of Conservative Home, says that he's got an inside track on what's going on behind the scenes, that people have been telling him stuff, what's been going on, and you can believe him or not, but quite frankly, it's an interesting angle to this story that not many people have covered. Whereas everyone's covered the open spat, the fact that we've got someone coming out saying, well, actually, there's this other stuff going on behind the scenes, bit of an interesting direction to take it. So I thought we'd go in this way instead. So before we do go on more into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button down below. Of course, there's the Patreon page, the one affiliation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this. Over to Conservative Home with the title of Was this weekend Reform UK's low ebb? Oh, I see what you did there. Anyway, This isn't the article I was going to write. Everybody is, of course, aware that there are seismic changes in the geopolitics, of course, going on. Yeah, he's right. He's absolutely right. Quite frankly, sometimes, and I knew this was going to happen the second he won. There is going to be like zero quiet stuff, and bear in mind, there is stuff that is going on that Trump is doing on in America I am just not even bothering going to cover because it would just consume so much of my time just covering and looking all that. And like I say, we are a UK politics channel. As funny and as weird as it is looking at all that stuff going on in America, I'd rather focus on Trump's disastrous foreign policy rather than what's going on in his domestic area and on in America. Like I say, that would just dominate, quite frankly, the rest of the channel for his rest of his term. And there's other stuff I want to cover as well, but there's only so many hours in the day to cover this stuff, so I have to pick and choose. But I do agree with him on that. And of course, the economy isn't behaving the way that the current government wants to, even if it may seem like it is their own fault. I could, of course, write more on about all those subjects in the future. However, Conservative Home has a very specific role, looking, of course, into the fortunes or misfortunes of the Conservative Party. And I would definitely say the more misfortunes at the moment of the current Conservative Party. And, of course, the politics of the right. So, despite having written about Reform UK on Friday, the events of the last 72 hours do make it feel like that was, in effect, part one. And just for those who may have missed it, he did write an article on Friday, which was about basically saying that Reform UK and their candidates aren't serious candidates, which was kind of an interesting article on that. But we'll see. Maybe it's worth going over that. I don't know. Maybe we'll see. We'll see. But I am planning a Reform double header on this. So we'll be having a look at some of Reform UK's policies in the next video for sure. Because, yeah, they are not, shall we say, what the public would vote for, I think. Anyway, back to this. Here's part two. So before I start, I want to be clear. Not least to the many, of course, Reform voters who I know read this site. We are not obsessed with Reform. Well, the number of articles that are on this site about Reform, I would beg to differ on that. But, we continue. But we would not, of course, be doing our job if we tried to ignore them. The polling alone, of course, means, like it or not, they've become part of the story and our purview at Conservative Home. This weekend, I simply could not ignore them. My many WhatsApp were usually busy with people busy explaining to me what was really, quote, going on. Contrary to the suggestions, of course, in many of the new newspapers to doubt the delight or even the relish of the Conservatives and Labour will have now greeted the fallout between Rupert Lowe and his party leadership. This was not about, of course, indulging that or even reveling in that. This is about explaining what I've been told was going on from the inside. And this is why I'm covering it. Because, yeah, any other story we'd be covering, even myself, I was going, look at Lowe and Farage having a go at each other. And I will say this now, the timing of this stuff being revealed by Rupert Lowe, about Rupert Lowe, literally like hours, like 24 hours after he'd had a go at Farage, saying he probably wouldn't make a good prime minister. Especially when this goes all the way back to a couple of months ago, where Elon Musk had signaled out Rupert Lowe as being the better candidate to lead Reform UK, not Nigel Farage. And there's been this, shall we say, tension and uneasiness since then on that. So, back to this. The Conservatives, of course, do still carry the self-inflicted wounds and brutal consequences of now protracted infighting. Labour, of course, now suffering their own signs of it. So, there should be a no holier than thou about Reform's current problem. But what makes it significant is that it is a totally avoidable exposure now of the vulnerabilities inherently that they have. Other parties do have their own big problems. This is entirely reforms, almost entirely self-inflicted, notwithstanding, of course, our own. So, yeah, he is right. And I think this is him more writing to that audience because, as we've seen before on this channel, when we've covered the comments in conservative homes, sometimes you can see people say, well, I was a ex-conservative voter, now I've joined Reform. So this is him trying to sort of justify why he's doing this. And it's just sort of going in, what's the saying? The lady doth protest too much, or in this case, the gentleman doth protest just a bit too much. I think trying to justify why he's covering this. Of course, we're going to cover infighting and things like that. Why wouldn't we? That's all you need to say on this. You don't need to continually justify it time and time and time again as to why you are covering this stuff. You are allowed to, laugh and point at other parties. I do that on many occasions myself. So I also concluded last Friday's piece with my feeling. Having talked to, of course, a number of Nigel Farage's HQ workers and lieutenants, that they were, quote, serious about being serious. And that it was a surprise, to put it mildly, that Rupert Lowe and the Reform MP of Yarmouth had then thrown now doubt on that in my comments in the Daily Mail. And yeah, that was, like I say, it's all to do with this. What Rupert Lowe said in the Daily Mail, that Farage is a messianic figure, that he really can't change or really reform the party too much. And now all this stuff has come out. Now, is there any validity to these claims? Well, we know they've been referred to the police. We know that Reform UK's lawyer came out, but apparently contradicted some of this stuff, apparently, from what I've heard. So it looks like this could get very, very messy and legal indeed. And for those of you who may have longer memories, I'd like you to ask you, or even go back, because this is something I've wanted to cover for a while now, the fallout and spat that happened between Farage and Robert Kilroy Silk, who Farage had to, take out in order to gain control of UKIP. That spat is legendary. And at some point, we will have to cover it on this channel, but there are plenty of archive stuff about that from back in the day when that was going on. Not least from Robert Kilroy Silk himself and Farage. So, yeah, those two back in the day went at it. One would write a newspaper column about the other one would respond, and it was just a constant back and forth between them. Needless to say, yeah, legendary spat going on. Maybe we'll go back and cover it one day, because this does seem to have some, correlation between what's going on today, that Farage does not like to share the spotlight. And I think he feels that Rupert Lowe was trying to steal the spotlight from it. So back to this. So this morning, of course, the whip does remain suspended. An investigation is apparently now underway into his behaviour towards staffers and the party chairman, Zia Youssef. And any signs that there is now a thaw in relations with Farage seems a winter away. This is going to... trust me, I'm going to keep my eye on how this investigation folds out. But methinks we are going to get a lot of revelations, not only about what was going on in Reform UK, because a lot of this stuff is now going to have to come to light, but you are possibly going to see a lot more other internal stuff come to light because of this. Just as what happened when things got very litigious between Farage and Kilroy Silk at the time. So the first signs that this was, quote, more than just a little local difficulty, as the journalist, now MPs, although they don't have Isabel Oakeshott described on things on Twitter, was that it was all rather stiffly brushed aside by their bigger voices and outriders now on social media. Aaron Banks, who was, of course, back on the pitch, suggested that I'd spent far too much time talking to Kevin Towler, Reform's now former communication man and long-standing traveller with the Farage bandwagon. Until recently, the fact is, I could have, and I've always found Gelwyn excellent company. But in truth, the people talking to me were and still are in the thick of trying to make Reform UK achieve its objective of being in power and in government. So now he's like, hey, I'm talking to all these people who are, part of the bandwagon. They're giving me the inside scoop of what's going on, So I have an interesting theory that Giles Dunlop may know a lot more than he might be willing to let on. And maybe he's not going to, shall we say, spill all the tea yet. But who knows? He might in the future. So back to this. Reform's official statement about Lowe's suspension, of course, seemingly in response to his Mail article criticizing Farage, was both very tin-eared and smacked of the whole thing being far from more than a mere difficulty. Of course, it is not. It is not unrecoverable. But that now depends on how Farage, Zia Youssef, and Rupert Lowe and the rest of those at the top decide to play it. However, this is now a very public row, and it goes to the heart of Reform's now biggest obstacle, that they may, of course, overcome them. But now, of course, they exist in the open. There has been mentioned by many the feeling, and much of it, of course, expressed by exasperated Reform supporters, that Nigel really doesn't like rivals to the limelight. And of course, the barb of Lowe describing him as messianic, and of course, not in a good way, will have stung. And this has been the thing that has constantly been brought up for Farage. It was said about him back in the UKIP days. It was said about him back in the Brexit Party days as well. Now, Reform people are saying it as well. Because you cannot run a party just on a single individual. You have to put more people out there. You cannot just run an effective government and just have it be the Nigel Farage show, with, guest supporting band, Richard Tice and Lee Anderson. There's got to be more people, and you have to be able to, send those people out to do the news rounds. But of course they don't. It is always dominated time and time again by Farage. And you never see anyone else, even though they've got, like I say, 4 other MPs. That really doesn't help your cause. Especially even back in the UKIP days, where it was said constantly, time and time again, that Farage would do and go on Question Time because he knew he could not trust any other person or like that local representative to do a good as job as him. And that's how he always spun it. But this got under a lot of people's skin back in the day. And it's doing it again. So it's for sooner or later, this will explode again. This type of infighting will come out again, because you cannot be a party based just on a single person. You cannot do that. Cannot do that at all. So back to this. Farage and even I, of course, discussed this back in December, when he told me that he knew he needed to demonstrate that this wasn't the case. And we actually agreed he needed a bigger, broader team to rely on to now match his ambitions, reform that the Surge now presented them with. It is very telling that he has now expressed elsewhere that none of his MPs would have had a, quote, cat in hell's chance of being MPs without him. How humble. How humble of him to say that. That is probably true. But it is interesting that he says it. I am told that with the growing spotlight now on Rupert Lowe, has indeed been the subject of several conversations in Reform HQ, but possibly that is now par for the course in politics. Why did that spotlight grow? Well, as we already said, it was because back some time ago when Elon Musk spoke out against reform, saying that Farage isn't the person, that, oh, it's this Rupert Lowe character, the spotlight suddenly got turned on him. And if you were a political party, maybe at that point, you would be wanting to field a bit more Rupert Lowe, put him out there, get him under the spotlight, get him to do the media rounds. Heck, have him go out and back, Nigel Farage, say to Elon Musk, oh, well, thank you very much for the vote of confidence, but, I think Nigel's doing a terrific job. He could have done all that, but they didn't. He didn't, because Farage wants to keep absolute full control. I think Farage is an absolute control freak, and that if he is not in control, he doesn't play ball. And I think that is going to be Reform's biggest obstacle. And I think even if Farage goes, they lose a lot of name and brand recognition. Because, not a cat in hell's chance of being MPs without him. He's right. UKIP was the Nigel Farage bandwagon that he rode on. Not many people can really name any other people from that time in UKIP other than Nigel Farage, even though they did have, people stand to be MPs, councillors, and other MEPs. It's very difficult to name them. But that's where they are. And it does look like that he is not giving up his control freak ways. That's why I think when finally we get this great reform of Reform UK, I still think you will see that Farage has pretty much still full control of the party. It ain't going to change. So he's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Of course, we all know that very well indeed. So part of the business, of course, Reform getting serious is that Farage has actually been trying to get match fit. Pints are now mainly for photo ops, but once now the ever-present Rothmus is now less present. He's been focused on the project. However, the business of, quote, professionalizing this now hybrid company, Party, has been, the other issue is on the problem list. Zia Yusuf, now according to some, is, quote, brilliant, tireless, and, quote, the powerhouse behind the scenes. To others, by the way, who are very loyal to the cause, the future prospects of reform, and to Farage, tell me he couldn't run a bath. So the guy who you've got trying to reform Reform UK and make it into a more professional body, the people who you have person you have chosen, and the people that are closest to Farage, which again I think lends credence to my theory that any reform is going to leave basically with Farage in complete control of the party. Maybe it's going to do that. And I still think there could come a time where maybe you could see the other mainstream political parties get together and actually turn around and say, hold on a second, that's not a political party. They shouldn't be allowed to run candidates. I'm just saying, maybe they should do that. Maybe they should. But it does seem that you've put someone useless there to make it look like that you are trying to change the party, because Yusuf has been there a couple of months now, and he doesn't really seem to have done anything with Reform UK on that front. So, to be fair, I don't know which is true, but Yusuf is best described as Marmite in Reformland, and in messages to me, the critics now outnumbered the fans. Well, I would say, what has he actually done? How has he actually done anything for reform? He really hasn't. So I think it may be this quote that he couldn't run a bath. So he certainly is trying to run a party, or at least change a party to be more like a political party. Doesn't seem to be going through with any of that at all. Anyway, certainly the resentments at the rather secretive and unsympathetic operations of Zia Yusuf and now his closest team are only just underneath the surface. I didn't even have to scratch to find them. Old habits die hard. And as journalists, I'm reassured that this comes from multiple separate sources. Online, it has been open season on a man happy to use that medium for his own brand of of cut and thrust politics. The general charge being laid publicly by some very, very unhappy reform voters, especially those who like the cut of Rupert Lowe's jib, is being laid at Farage and Yusuf's door. The basic thrust is thus variations now from prosaic to the unprintable of we thought you were going to be different and now you're behaving just like the others. We are very disappointed. What do I always say about populists? That sooner or later, people realize, oh, actually, they're not what we thought they were. They're not actually how they behaved. One of the big things that actually came out recently is you may remember the TUC did a video. They went to Clacton and said, hey, do you like all these things in this bill? Well, do you know that Nigel Farage voted against this? And all these people who said, yeah, we love Nigel, I voted for him. The second that they turned around and said that, they were like, what? I can't believe this. How could Nigel, man of the people, vote against an expansion of workers' rights? How could he? No. Yeah. Interesting that is seems to be the big takeaway. We thought you were different, and now you're behaving just like the others. We are very disappointed. Anyway, let's back to this. And that and the fact that all of this has now been unfolding in public rather than behind closed doors, with Farage now claims it is testimony to their transparency. I'm not sure that dog hunts. It does seem to me, I think, an attempt to get rid of Rupert Lowe. All this seems to be the biggest and best way to get rid of Rupert Lowe. Now, if this all ends in a by-election, does Reform retain that seat? Who knows? Who knows? And of course, she smiled softly, and then completely knifed Lowe on Talk TV. Isabel Oakeshott, Richard Trice's partner, and possibly now the other half of his political brain, said, "Poor little Rupert. He's quite new to politics. This is what happens to people who are amateurs at politics. They become MPs, and suddenly they think, yay, look at me. I could, I think I could be prime minister." And they do that. And they all do it. Bless him. Oh, oof. Yeah. Yeah. She was certainly smiling very softly while carrying a knife on that one. Very softly on that one. Weathering, of course, this scorn aside, the fact that Reform is now relatively new to politics and to the House of Commons, so far, it has done very little. Labour and the Tories are actually very aware of that. But in essence, Reform's very pitches, yay, look at us, Nigel could be Prime Minister. And that's something else to point out. They have done nothing Nothing in the Commons. Barr tried to attempt to pass a bill to stop the government using quantitative easing in future scenarios. That bill, by the way, is not going to pass because it's supported by like 4 MPs. It was an opposition day motion bill. That's when they decided to put it in, and none of them, it isn't going to pass. The government is not going to tie its hand, so it can't use quantitative easing if it needed to. But of course, you've got to remember these free market fundamentalists hate the fact that quantitative easing exists and is an idea. This, as far as they're concerned, if there's a market crash, then it should crash because that will get rid of all those zombie companies, and somehow new companies will then sprout up to take their place. Suddenly lends a lot of credence to the idea that, Donald Trump actually wants to create a recession. Naturally is very fine and wants a recession to happen, which is very worrying indeed on that front. But anyway, back to this. If they are indeed serious, and rows like this one undermine any pretense to that, they need to fix this in such a way that those issues I mentioned are now put firmly to bed. How do they do that right now is far from clear. And I will say this now, given what Giles Dunlop has said here, some of the stuff that he has revealed from like these inside sources, it seems Reform and what's going on in behind the scenes of Reform UK is in a bigger mess than that. And not only that, but there is a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of very big dissatisfaction from Reform voters. So once again, I put it to you, why should we be so worried about Reform UK? Because quite frankly, they are coming across as a massive, massive paper tiger. Like I say, last week, 9 by-elections, Reform UK didn't win a single one. But if they're so popular, why aren't they winning elections? Because in the run-up to last general election, we could tell what was going to happen from the by-election wins that Labour and the Lib Dems were having. I am not worried about Reform UK. And I will keep on saying that until there is actual evidence to suggest that they are an actual serious threat. But anyway, let's have a look what people have said on this. Someone else here. Such events undeniably, of course, do cause harm. It is very worrying that Habib and Lowe have now found themselves outcasts in such a short time. This cannot keep happening, or even more of now an already exhausted electorate will not vote. The idea that the Conservatives, Labour, and the Libs will gain where Reform loses ground is for the birds. The did not vote won the general election of 2024. If Reform UK now self-implode, the DNV will win. The DNV, I don't even know what party that is, will win. Oh, the did not vote will win, of course, the general election in 2029 by a landslide. Yeah. People being politically unmotivated is a problem. More people should be politically motivated. That is the biggest problem. Getting people out to vote. It is a massive problem. Massive problem. I do agree with that. Let's see if there's any other ones on this. I don't think there's any good ones, unfortunately. Someone else says here, if you look back at, of course, the various political vehicles that Farage has now led over the decades, from UKIP through to the Brexit Party to the Reform, they have all had very similar issues. There are, of course, three main problems. The first is actually rising above the teens at best for the actual general election results. UKIP managed 12.6% in 2015, Reform 14.3% in 2024. The polls, the barrier seems to be at least the 30% points. All three parties managed to get poll a mid in the high 20s. The Brexit Party even led in the polls several times, as Reform has, but it never actually pans out into big wins in the general election. I keep on saying that time and time again. Yeah, the polls are deceptive because you've got to look at what's going on in by-elections. They ain't winning these by-elections. If they are so popular, why aren't they winning these by-elections? They're not. Like I say, last week, 9 by-elections took place last week. Reform didn't win a single one. So the second is Farage's leadership style. While his personality and talent for showmanship and communication skills have a huge pull on some people as party leader, he seems now to end up falling out with any other big character or anyone who becomes more popular in their own right. He is a one-man show, and you can't make a cabinet out of that. Again, what did I say earlier? You cannot have a party like that. You cannot even have a government like that. And I know there's things like, refer to Cameronism or Blairism. Those weren't built around one man. It was the idea that the ideas that these people had spread to other people, and they believed that as well. That it wasn't based on like that one man, that one individual. It was based on a set of ideas that they wanted to achieve. But it became known as Blairism because he was like the figurehead of the movement. You can't even say that about Faragism because there is no wider set of ideals except this really hard stance on, migration. What other things is he offering? Nothing. You cannot make a cabinet, a government out of that. So the third issue is trying to broaden the party appeal beyond being about immigration. The advantage of being firmly anti-immigrant is it does guarantee a core support. The disadvantage is that it is limited. Exactly. We'll be doing this in the next video, more about their policies. They aren't very popular, to be honest. To actually win a general election, Farage needs to appeal beyond that core of people who aren't just thinking about immigration and actually find endless anti-immigration rhetoric off-putting. Possibly he thought Rupert Lowe was too hard-line for this general consumption. But it's exactly what some members wanted. Yeah, and bear in mind, Rupert Lowe has been taking an even harder, even more hard-right immigration stance. That's why he's become so popular. That's why he's become so more popular on this. Someone else then responded, yes, I would say that 2 and 3 do lead to 1. The single issues like Brexit and immigration are like flames to the moths of those who care excessively just about that issue. But there are many others who want now a fuller set of policies. And the problem is those who obsess about Brexit or immigration do not care about anything else. So a policy on one thing will be welcomed, but not by the others. Then Farage is just a complete Marmite character, the Pied Piper to some, toxic to others. The numbers in this country lead to social tensions. They affect every issue from public to social housing to the NHS is the root of every problem. Reform are addressing about the root causes. Immigration is not an issue. It has not been that at all. So yeah, it is one of those things that I think is just going to be, this is just another Farage vehicle. It can't and won't survive without Farage. if there is an attempt to, quote, more professionalize the party under Yusuf, I think it is just going to be all smoke and mirrors. I think Farage is going to be still left with the one in ultimate control of the party. And ultimately, as I said, 9 by-elections last week, Reform didn't even win a single one. If they are so popular, as people like to put, look at the polls, didn't win a single one. Why are we so worried about them? No? No, I'm dead serious about this. I do not think Reform are as a bigger threat as some people make them out to be. I think they are a massive paper tiger. Massive paper tiger. But as always, let me know what you think down below. And of course, we will keep an eye on what this how this spat develops, because I think this could get very litigious by the sounds of it. And of course, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.